Hello and welcome to the latest Royal Roundup from TalkTV. So pop the kettle on, this is the Royal Tea. I'm Sarah Hewson. Coming up today on a bumper episode, why the palace have been turning down the thermostat. Harry and Meghan have finally handed back the keys to Frogmore Cottage, plus find out what advice Roger Federer had for the Princess of Wales. Joining me to discuss all of that and lots more, our royal commentator and TalkTV regular Afua Hagan, the Daily Mirror's royal editor Russell Myers, and TalkTV host Daisy McAndrew. Now, the King has been forced to dip into his reserves after overspending to cover the costs of an unprecedented year of royal activity. That's according to official accounts. Buckingham Palace's net expenditure grew by more than £5 million this year to £107.5 million. Russell, you have pored over every line of the report, the financial accounts for the royal household. What are the headlines?
Well, I have indeed, and I'm sort of just getting over it after yesterday, to be honest. But
cure for insomnia?
I think so, yeah. I mean, there's an awful lot to get through. I mean, 107 million, it's a big headline figure, only the second time in history following on from last year that it's gone over 100 million. What does that amount to? I mean, there's lots being spent on travel. The fact that they've had to go into their reserves is an issue.
So that's because the sovereign grant that they're given by the government to fund the running of their day-to-day working activities doesn't cover the costs at the
Absolutely, yeah. Well, the government has set it at about 86.3 million is the figure, and that has been over the last couple of years. And the royal family is feeling the pinch. I mean, there is a cost of living crisis even for the royal family, it would seem. The resurfacing of Buckingham Palace is obviously taking up a huge chunk of the budget. I mean, that's 370 million over 10 years. Whether that will be on time to budget, they still say it will be. It's in its 7th year now. But the inflationary pressures, this kept being mentioned in the meeting I was in yesterday about the pressures on the royal household finances is something that they can't escape from. And I suppose that is something that we're all feeling, isn't it?
They're not immune to inflation, but also the year that we're talking about was one that they describe as one of grief, celebration and change and enormous expense.
Yes. And of course, it's true. So this isn't even a once-in-a-generation occurrence. This was once in 70 years. So, in fact, the royals haven't had to pay for a coronation, a state funeral, to the extent we've had other state funerals, but not like the late Queen's state funeral was. So that's understandable.
The Platinum Jubilee, part of this financial year.
Exactly. So, obviously, fingers crossed on many different levels that they won't be having to pay for another coronation for quite some time, of course the next one being William's. But there were some really interesting elements in the report as well when you got down to where the money comes from. And obviously one of the reasons that their value has gone down, the value of what the family owns has gone down so much, is because of the pandemic. Retail values, because they own so much of London and so much land. But then some of the money that they have made has come from because the royal family owns the seabed.
Yes, the wind farms.
So I find that so fascinating. Of course, offshore wind farms is a big political issue, and anybody who happens to be lucky enough to own the seabed is absolutely raking it in, and that is the royal family.
Although the King has previously said, hasn't he, that any surplus from that, any of these enhanced revenues, he wants to see go to the greater good rather than his own coffers.
Yeah, he did say that earlier on this year, I think at the end of last year, that any profits made from that should be returned to the government. He talked about because of the cost of living crisis, that's the reason why he wanted to do that. And the amount that we are still giving the royal family, if you are, I think it's still around £1.26.
Well, it's about 27, but if you bring in the reserves, sort of raiding their piggy banks, about £1.52. And I still think that's pretty good value.
I mean, per person, I don't think we can complain.
You can't argue
much.
against it too much.
And we always look for the detail in this. And travel, one of the always something that's poured over to see how much they've spent on travel.
Helicopters, yeah. Well, last year when I was in the same meeting, one of Prince of Wales' senior aides, as he was then, was saying that the Prince of Wales, Charles, was allergic to using helicopters. He, really didn't fit in with his environmental credentials, and yet we have £1 million bill on helicopters. And you look at the travel. I mean, it was exorbitant. You're talking £187,000 spent on the Rwanda trip, another £147,000 spent to get Prince William over to Boston, what have you. But we haven't been on any major royal tours.
No.
I mean, this is the issue. I think that 147 wasn't Boston. But anyway, these issues are... We haven't been on major tours. What on earth are they going to do when there are, big autumn and spring tours taking place? It's going to ramp up and up. And I think that we'll have more questions to answer.
And Russell, what about the royal train? What is happening with the royal train?
Well, the royal
is it
train,
staying or going?
Well, this is a question they need to ask themselves, I think, because they said last year when the Queen would pass, when she would be no longer with us, they would have a review of it. And it costs an awful lot of money to wheel out. It's fantastic when you do see it pull into the stations. Obviously, big crowds when they do. But it's all about 40 grand a time. And it's even gone up this year. It's about 160,000 to just use it 4 times. And will the King still want to... Does he think it's good value for money? There is a review taking place. I suppose we'll find out later on in the year.
One of the ways the royal family have been trying to cut costs includes turning down the heating at Buckingham Palace and other royal homes, turning the thermostat down to 19 degrees.
And in the middle of winter, that is pretty cold.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we all probably experience thermo wars, as they're now called, where different members of the family are fighting over the thermostat. In my house, it's me turning it down, it's my other half turning it up. I think
we have the other gender divide in our house.
Exactly. So if you think about it, this is that writ large across the royal family, where Charles is in effect turning the thermostat down. And actually, some insiders saying 19. It's not 19. Some insiders saying it's often 16 degrees, which really is pretty cold. And I don't know about you, but the posher the family, the colder the house, often seems to be my own experience. You go to these very, very sort of stately homes, and there's everybody with 3 layers of jumpers on, absolute bright red noses, absolutely freezing, and it seems the royals are no different.
And turning the radiators off at weekends, the swimming pool's no longer being heated.
Oh dear.
They're in trouble with the
turn off the palace pool. But I guess it's not just cutting costs, is it? It's cutting emissions for the King and the royal households. Well, we do have vacant property in the portfolio now, though. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have finally handed back the keys of Frogmore Cottage to King Charles this week, nearly 6 months after being served with their eviction notice. So Frogmore Cottage back up for grabs?
Yes.
For whom?
Perhaps myself. Maybe I went out. Who knows? I mean, they kept on paying the rent on the property up until they handed the keys back. That's vacant. There's been talk about Prince Andrew going into that property, perhaps. Who knows? But it is... It could be problematic for Prince Harry especially, because as Council of State, he does need to have a permanent residence in the United Kingdom. And if he's given up Frogmore Cottage, that was his permanent residence, is there now another residence in the UK that's going to be named as his permanent residence, or is he going to have to give up his place as a Councillor of State? Could it be going to someone else in the royal family? And perhaps actually is a good idea, because he isn't a working royal. He does live in the United States, and if there was ever a need for him to step into the role of the monarch, he's not exactly easily accessible. So perhaps someone else should take up that role.
Do they do for Prince Harry a kind of royal Airbnb, an ad hoc basis?
I think he'll be given an apartment somewhere like St James's Palace, but it's part of this sort of royal residence merry-go-round. I mean, what's going to happen with Prince Andrew? We've had the talk of the Sussexes being evicted. Well, is Prince Andrew going to be able to stay in his mansion? Who knows?
I mean, it's interesting, as part of the report, we got confirmation that the money that Harry and Meghan have spent on doing up Frogmore Cottage, which was between
2.4 million.
2.4 million. I mean, That is a huge amount of money to spend on renovating a place. That's not the cost of the place, and
give up. I mean, they
exactly.
just walked
So
away,
in a way, they've sort of spent good money after bad. They're not getting that money back. So actually, I think we should be quite grateful.
Well, I think
to them for that.
Michael Stevens, the keeper of the Privy Purse, described it as a greatly enhanced asset, which it is now because its rental yield could be quite substantial. Well, earlier this week, the Prince of Wales launched a 5-year project to end homelessness in the United Kingdom, saying that he wants to make sure that instances of people being left without a roof over their heads are rare, brief and unrepeated. Prince William kicked off his 2-day tour of the 4 nations of the UK with a speech in London in which he told how he had been inspired by the innovative approach in Finland to tackling homelessness. How much of a difference do you think this campaign could make? Daisy?
I admire his authenticity. He genuinely cares about this subject. I've listened to quite a few podcasts that he did with some homeless people at the end of last year and the beginning of this year. And when you listen to him talking about it, he was very spontaneous, very off the cuff, very informed. It's obviously something that he spent time studying and cares about it, because we know that he was taken to Centrepoint, the homeless charity, when he was just 11-year-old schoolboy. So he's got it in his DNA. You know, that was by Diana. I worry that he could have made a bit more of a splash with this initiative. I mean, you know, there are £3 million going into it. He is trying to get different local authorities, NGOs, charities together, and he's trying to come up with a solution in the way that the Finnish have managed to almost eradicate homelessness. I also worry that it's a bit too political.
Well, yes, that's the next point, isn't it, actually? Because how do you take the politics out of this?
Well, I mean, I think, when it comes to something like homelessness, the homelessness is going to go up this year because of the cost of living crisis. And a lot of people are looking to the government and saying, you know, the reason why we're in the cost of living crisis is because of your economic mismanagement. So you cannot really stay apolitical when you're tackling this kind of problem.
A societal issue.
Exactly. And while I commend him for trying to do that, and I'd like to think that he's aware of his level of privilege and how perhaps unlikely a person it is for him to take up this mantle, perhaps he can be this convener of people that brings together charities, like you said, policymakers, to come up with genuine working policies to tackle the issues around homelessness. And it's not just about being unhoused. It's about mental health issues, addiction. It's about the cost of living crisis. I mean, the centre that he was at on Monday intervenes before people get to homelessness. So they had an example of a mother with 2 children who became homeless because she couldn't afford after-school care. If she could have afforded after-school care, she could have done extra work to make rent. So the intervention would be provide free after-school care. Yeah. She can work more and pay the rent. These type of things are great. That's what needs to be pouring money into, but bringing people together who have those big ideas to tackle the problem.
Russell, just a quick thought from you before we move on.
Well, just is it a potential thankless task? I mean, you talk about straddling these issues between the charities, of which there are many who have all got behind him. 16 CEOs backed him. But listen, best of luck to him.
Yeah, 5 years he's set as a target to end homelessness. Meanwhile, the Princess of Wales has been shining her royal spotlight on a pioneering programme dedicated to keeping women in the justice system with their children. Afua, tell us about this, what the project is.
Well, this was a centre that was opened in Portsmouth. And basically, it's about keeping women and children together. So a mother who perhaps would have ended up in prison, for instance, it's an intervention, again, to keep the woman and the child together, the women and children together, to keep families together in this centre that's called One Small Thing. So she went there to meet the owner of the centre. I think she's been trying to get it together for about 3 years or something like that. So she went there to open it, met the owner of the centre, and left a handwritten note that said, "I see you and I am with you," and then signed it, Catherine. And again, this ties in with our early years project about keeping young children together with their mums who otherwise may have ended up in prison. I think it's a brilliant project. Again, this is what we want to see. We want to see policy. We want to see research. We want to see centres and things that are actually working
Practically
and doing
making
the
a
job.
difference.
Yes.
And it was very significant that she wrote her name
Yeah.
because in the past she's been asked to sign things, give a signed autograph in effect, and she said politely declined and said that she's not allowed to sign things, and the senior royals aren't allowed to. So the fact that she did put her name, Catherine,
Very
on
personal.
that was very personal,
Yeah.
quite significant.
And Afua, you had a personal connection, I think, to one of her other engagements. This was at the Young V&A,
Yes.
formerly the Museum of Childhood.
Yeah, which has been a favourite of ours, actually. Before it closed for a 3-year refurb, it was the Museum for Childhood, and now it's the Young V&A in Bethnal Green. And my friend's son was one of, Zio, he's so cute, he was one of the young kids that was greeting her, gave her a goodie bag.
I saw him, gave her 3 goodie bags for George and Charlotte and Louis.
So sweet, because their school's just round the corner, so they got a sneak preview as well. So great to see her there. Again, ties in with her project, and it's brilliant for that museum to have her support. And like I said, right on my doorstep, so I'll be around the corner there this weekend.
The Duchess of York has had surgery after being diagnosed with breast cancer. The 63-year-old spoke candidly about how she received her diagnosis during a new episode of her podcast, and it was apparently her sister who pushed her to get checked. This emerged over the weekend, Russell, after the Duchess of York had been in for surgery.
Yeah, I mean, despite a shocking story as this is, it is a good news story because not only is Sarah recovering at home, we understand she's in good spirits and she's got a message, and she has said that this is something that she wants to get behind. I mean, people I was speaking to at the weekend have said that not only is she facing it in her predictable way that she does, but she wants to be sort of a champion for breast cancer now. I mean, this is something that was a shock diagnosis. She went to a routine mammogram. She was going to put it off. It was her sister who said, what are you doing? You've got to go.
Call from Australia.
Absolutely, you've got to go to it, and don't be so silly. And she had no symptoms whatsoever. A shadow showed up on the scan, and she was in for a mastectomy just days later. And so, yeah, I think she will become a champion. She's done a lot of work with the Teenage Cancer Trust and breast cancer for many decades, and we wish her well.
And she's almost evangelical now on that mission, isn't she, to get people to get checked, because that is the only reason why her breast cancer was discovered early.
Exactly, and actually the podcast that she's been making for a while, it is very listenable, and she is personable. I think she comes across very well. She's got the right kind of personality for that sort of product, and she does it with this friend of hers who's the editor of First News, a children's newspaper. And it was interesting listening to her so much of it when she was talking about her father, Ronald, who had prostate cancer, and he decided, in a similar way to her, but of course, many years ago, to go public about his diagnosis. And his friends, his posh friends, were horrified at how he was talking about the big C and talking about prostate, which was obviously very a personal issue. And they told him to his face that he shouldn't have discussed it. And
we don't want to hear about it.
We don't want to hear about it. And he was of the same view as Fergie is, where he said, well, people need to get checked. So if I can encourage people to get checked, that's a good thing, surely. And all his friends were like, no, you shouldn't be talking. And so she's the same. And I thought she was interesting talking about her daughters as well, of course, one of whom has been very vocal about her own dyslexia, and the other has been very vocal about her scoliosis of the spine and talking about not covering that up. And I thought there was a really interesting theme there.
And we know, Afua, don't we, from previous examples, that when people in the public eye and celebrities start talking about this, it does have a hugely positive impact on the number of people going for screening.
It really does. I mean, Jake Goody was cervical cancer, Sarah Harding, breast cancer as well. And having had my own experience with breast cancer when I was much younger, a very young age, and I was 17, when I found
17
something,
is
really
unthinkable,
young.
really.
And it was really scary. But what I would say to people is, first of all, recovery is possible. I am here now. But second of all, it is all about getting checked. But talking about it as well, just talking to your friends about it. I mean, it's great that her and sister encouraged her not to miss that checkup. I mean, I truly believe, and I've spoken to you about this before, I strongly believe that the age at which we get mammograms is far too old. I definitely think that it should be younger. And I wonder if that's something that the Duchess of York would agree with. I just think, there's so many instances of of women having it younger.
My mother being
low.
one who had breast cancer in her 40s before you would go for a mammogram.
Exactly, you know, and I really think that's something that should be picked up on, that we should be doing these routine checks earlier. I mean, you can sign up. I sign up for a text message alert that I get from a cancer charity that reminds me to check my boobs every month. Everybody should do that. You know, it's about talking
Really
about
good
these
advice,
things.
yeah.
It's about being aware. It's about going for all your screenings, smear tests, everything like that. We have to be much more open about these things.
Well, we wish the Duchess of York a very full and speedy recovery. Now, Buckingham Palace has once again missed its diversity target for staff, with the number from ethnic minority backgrounds remaining at 9.7%. The King's household had set a goal of 10% for the end of 2022. It's now introduced a new target of 14% of all employees by 2025. A Buckingham Palace official said of the diversity figures, "I recognise we're not where we would like to be, and we are committed to making progress in this area, and hence why we've raised the target to 14%, having got close to our 10% figure. We now need to set out the scale of our ambition to really make headway in this space." I mean, Russell, 10%, why is it so hard to get there?
Well, just that statement there, and if this was the first year that that happened, you might say, OK, well, they've just missed the 10%. But this is the third year in a row. And when I was going through the Sovereign Grant Report, one of the first things I looked at, because people will want to know why they haven't achieved that goal. And then just to say, well, we're going to make it 14% and we're really going to have a big push, I don't think that's good enough, to be honest. And on the backdrop of the Duchess of Sussex, you know, making those allegations of racism against the royal family.
And that is what prompted these diversity figures.
And then there was this bullying investigation that we haven't heard anything about, that sort of disappeared into the ether.
And the Lady Hussey incident.
Absolutely. And again, these are issues that people are fresh in people's minds. And I don't think it's acceptable, to be honest. I think they should have achieved this target. When you look at Kensington Palace, they're knocking around 16%. They have a huge gender balance of 65% women, I think. So these things can be done.
It can be done.
Too many excuses.
I mean, one of the excuses that they used, which I do think should be taken into account, is, of course, this year, with the Queen's death, the new King has had to merge two households. The Queen's household, I think, was considerably whiter than Charles's household, and Charles's household is considerably whiter than William's household. And you can understand how that has happened. And so I think by merging the Queen's household and the King's household, you have had some problems. They have gone backwards. The numbers have gone a bit backwards rather than forwards. So you would hope that in the next year or two that would be gone, and there would be some natural. Obviously, we know they've had to make quite a lot of redundancies, which were in the report as well. That more of the Queen's old household will be retiring or leaving or made redundant, and that should help the diversity figures as well.
And on the subject of diversity in the royal family, Sir Trevor Phillips says Meghan Markle had to learn to be black when she joined the royal family, but made a bit of a mess of it. Afua, Sir Trevor was talking on Piers Morgan Uncensored earlier this week, and he was referring to the fact that Meghan grew up in a wealthy suburb of Los Angeles. She went to a private school, and he said race was never a part of her background until she came here and was in a relationship with Prince Harry. What did you make of the remarks?
I mean, Sir Trevor is very short-sighted, to make these remarks, because first of all, how do you learn to be black? Is there a course? Is it a university course, a high school course? Where do we take it? I didn't take it. Did he take it? And what is being black exactly? You know, what is it? What are those characteristics that he's trying to say that Meghan did or did not have? Is he implying that she wasn't black enough? What is black enough for Sir Trevor? And also, how dare he talk about this experience of a mixed race woman who he's never met, doesn't know, hasn't spoken to, about her experience? You know, it's this kind of gaslighting her and implying that she's not black enough. For who? For him? For Prince Harry? For Piers Morgan? For who?
Has she talked about it herself in the past, in her Archetypes podcast, for example, and also in interviews where she talked about being in Hollywood and not really knowing where she fitted when she was seeing casting directors, for example?
I mean, she's talked about her mixed race heritage. You know, she's very close with her mum, It's not like she didn't know she was black growing up, you know? It's that it wasn't so much of an issue, or it wasn't made to be an issue until she came here. And it's not about, you know, being black and learning on the job to be black. I just have so much issue with those words. It's the inference that she's not black enough. It's the inference that you can learn to be black, as if there's one way to be black. And it's very disappointing to hear someone like Sir Trevor Phillips, who's a very prominent black broadcaster, producer, made an incredible documentary about the Windrush generation, which is really well worth a watch. Unlike these comments, which aren't worth a watch. It's just very disappointing to see him sort of run roughshod over someone's experience, which he clearly has it's nothing to do with him, because he is a Jamaican man and she is a African-American and white woman. He doesn't have any authority to talk about her experience, having not spoken to her. And there's not one way to be black, sorry.
He also, Daisy, talked about the Oprah interview and perhaps the most damaging element to come out of that.
Yeah.
When Meghan talked about conversations happening within the royal family about the colour of Archie's skin. And he suggested that that would be commonplace in every black family.
I mean, there are people who would agree with that and there are people who wouldn't agree with that. Of course, to remind viewers, I'm not sure anybody needs reminding, that the implication from that interview with Oprah was that not only had a member of the royal family, senior member of the royal family, questioned before Harry and Meghan even knew they were having children what colour, what skin colour their unborn children would have, but the implication, the inference was from that most onlookers and viewers took was that that person was saying dark was bad and light was good. That was what people understood, and that is a clearly racist comment. Of course, Harry and Meghan, backtracked on that afterwards and said, no, they weren't implying that somebody was racist. They were just implying that there was
a long
bias.
And it was a long time afterwards.
There was bias.
We should say, yes.
Trevor Phillips went one step further and he was saying, you know, these comments could have been completely innocent, not bias, not racism, but simply people wondering, as they do with a white couple, will the baby have red hair or blonde hair?
Well, I'll turn to you then, Afua. Are those conversations that would happen in your family?
I mean, we've never had that conversation in my family ever. And we have all different types of people in my family. And we've never had that conversation. Some families might have that conversation. They genuinely might. I can only speak about my family. But you also have to look at it how Meghan and Harry took those comments. And of course, we did have later when they did kind of say, oh no, we didn't think it was racism. We perhaps thought it was an unconscious bias, and I wish they had qualified that and said that at the time. I think that was a bit disappointing. But it's about their experience. It's about how they took those comments. And like I said, Sir Trevor Phillips should not be here trying to run roughshod over someone's experience. He doesn't have a right to downplay that.
Russell?
Well, again, I think it's all down to experience, isn't it? And I was shocked at the comments. I thought that he wasn't in a position to make them, and it's an unfortunate issue that he was taking up, I think.
And we know from Neil Basu, former head of counter-terrorism at the Met Police, that there is evidence that Meghan received huge amounts of abuse from the far right, racist abuse and threats that have led to criminal
action. It's a difficult issue because those are the facts that she did suffer in that way.
Talking of Harry and Meghan, more details have been emerging from behind the scenes at Spotify and Netflix, with a Wall Street Journal headline this week: Harry and Meghan produce a Hollywood flop themselves. And Russell, among the information we've learnt was about discussions that were taking place for more material, the kind of things that they could produce. Harry had a plan to interview Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump,
the Pope,
Mark Zuckerberg, the Pope. He wanted to talk about childhood trauma with them.
Well, these are all great ideas. I mean, it might be on my list. Listen, I think that Harry is coming for a bit of a kicking at the moment, isn't he? We've had the fallout for Spotify. We've had these articles that are coming out left, right and centre about how awful they were to work with and what have you. But I think they need to take a whole root and branch look at where they are. What do they want to be? I mean, they already wanted to be in and out of the royal family. That couldn't happen. They were forced into this mode of becoming sort of Hollywood Hollywood celebrities, and they probably need to take their foot off the gas. But the problem is they ran into so many projects so quickly, and I think their reputation is damaged, unfortunately.
I think in some ways they were encouraged by Netflix and Spotify. Both of all the streaming companies were absolutely on a high during the pandemic because we were all stuck at home watching streaming services. So the shares were rocketing. They were looking for new products.
They were throwing huge amounts of money.
Throwing money at people left, right, and centre to do podcasts, to do TV shows, to do reality shows, all the rest of it. Then lockdown lifted, the share price plummeted. They've had to make 800. One of the companies, I can't remember if it's Netflix or Spotify, just made 800 redundancies, so that they are now having to tighten the belt, and people like Harry and Meghan are being...
Well, they're collateral damage,
collateral damage,
Spotify
exactly.
have said, we made mistakes, signing all these big money projects, of which they are probably the highest profile, and their reputation gets burned.
Having said that, if you're looking for ways to cut your costs, and some of your colleagues or employees have been annoyingly lacking in, the work ethic,
or you look
they
at
are going to be the first to go.
You look at the cost per episode,
and you look at how expensive.
What about Netflix, Afua? The deal, is that going to go the same way as Spotify?
I don't think so, because Netflix have come out this week and said that they're very happy with the deal that they have with Harry and Meghan. That the documentary that they put out was, their biggest documentary of last year. And so I think, given by that, they're absolutely fine with the deal. There's talks of perhaps a period drama coming from them. We know that they have the Invictus series that's coming out, and there's this series about inspiring people as well. I think they'll be absolutely fine with the Netflix
It's never
deal.
going to get any bigger than the first Netflix series they did.
No, which is talking
So they
about
are damned if they do, damned if they don't.
Yeah.
OK. There is more to come on Harry and Meghan, though, because their friend and biographer Omid Scoby has announced he's going to be releasing a new book on the monarchy on November the 21st. The author's previous title, Finding Freedom, covered the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's decision to step down as senior royals. Revealing the publication date, Scoby said his new book would be a penetrating investigation into the royal family's fight for survival. Will the palace be bracing themselves?
Well, it sounds uncomfortable, whatever that is.
Doesn't it?
I'm not too sure what to think of this, to be honest, because I think I've read that whether Omid has said it himself, that he's the most impartial journalist out there. I mean, his takedown of the royal family is going to leave them very uncomfortable. Listen, we will all read it. The success of Finding Freedom speaks for itself. A global bestseller in so many countries. So, what is there left to say? I mean, we all want to know about those conversations from Harry's side about the sort of eviscerating nature of his relationship.
But we've heard about
I
it,
think
haven't we?
so.
We've heard it.
This is the fascinating thing, just going back to the conversation we were just having about what left is there for Harry and Meghan to sell, because they've pretty much sold all, some people would say, all the whinging there is to do. So if they are briefing Omid Scoby, as we now know they did on his previous book, even though it was denied at the time, they're giving it away for free, which I think was probably going to be quite unlikely this time round, because they need to cash in
themselves.
for themselves.
Yeah.
But exactly.
But this book promises to be about more than Harry and Meghan, to be about the whole royal family. A bit of a takedown of every one of them. So you might have Harry and Meghan briefing Omid Scoby, but maybe
Who else is going to be briefing
We
Omid Scoby,
don't know.
given his connections to the Sussex?
I mean, I can't imagine that there will be people within the palace wanting to deal with him, but I'm sure he would say differently. And the proof will be in the pudding, won't it? If he's lifting the lid on palace life, as this book presents itself to be, then we'll be talking about it at the time.
Oh, we will.
We certainly will. The Princess of Wales has gone viral with a video alongside Roger Federer. She was shooting a film to highlight Wimbledon's ball boys and girls when she caught a ball heading towards her. Here's what happened next.
Good catch.
Are you allowed to do that?
Oh yeah, are you allowed to do that? That's a good
In
point.
Australia, they would catch it, but here in Wimbledon, they don't.
Yeah, you're not meant to catch it. You're meant to let it bounce and then get it, but good catch.
Has everyone seen the video? Yeah. What do we think? She held her own, didn't she?
Yes. I mean, we might see her competing in a couple of years.
She's pretty good.
She's good.
She's pretty
good.
good.
I liked her tennis outfit as well.
The most important
Exactly.
things there.
I thought it was really sweet, and we know that she loves tennis. That's been a passion of hers for a long time, not just watching it, but playing it. But I thought it was very brave. A lot of the royals wouldn't put themselves in that position where, now clearly she would have had a say-so over what went out in the final.
I was going to say, you wouldn't have
Yeah.
you missing.
She wasn't tanking the vote.
Exactly, doing a sort of patsy, volleys and so on. But she can hit a ball.
I was impressed with
you
her
know,
serve as well,
And
yeah.
she can do, and of course, as with everything she does, she looked amazing. And I thought Roger Federer was really sweet in it. Good for him.
Well, that's all we've got time for this week. My thanks to Afua, Russell and Daisy. If you want to join in with the debate, make sure you leave a comment. We will be back next week with all of the latest on the royal family. We hope you can join us. We'll see you then.